Unity Press Conference for January 9th, 2026. I am your moderator, Ms. Shanika Haynes, and joining today's presser is Mr. Aubrey C. Norton, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and a Partnership for National Unity, and Mr. Sharma Solomon, Member of Parliament. Today's press statement will be read in two parts, and we will begin with the leader.
The Partnership for National Unity expresses grave concern over a pattern of governmental failure by the PPPC administration that undermines Guyanese workers' dignity, constitutional rights, and their ability to earn a livable income. The issues now confronting this nation are documented realities of systemic failures of the government with direct consequences for the lives and livelihood of Guyanese. While the foregoing is the reality as it relates to our oil resources, unemployment is high, and citizens, especially public servants, struggle to derive adequate benefits from oil revenues. We call on the government to put workers first. The constant erosion of workers' rights and the virtual destruction of their trade unions and the trade union movement compound the situation and need to be reversed with immediacy. Oil revenues squandered, physical prudence abandoned. APNU strongly condemns the PPPC's government reckless expenditure of Guyana's oil revenues as exposed by APNU parliamentary leader Dr. Terence Campbell. Between September 2024 and September 2025, the government spent 89% of oil revenues earned, leaving the Natural Resource Fund growing only marginally. This is because withdrawals are legally constrained by the National Resource Fund Act, the Natural Resource Fund Act. Attempt by the Minister of Finance to boast about the size of the NRF deliberately mislead the public. The reality is stark. Had it not been for statutory restrictions, the fund would have been nearly depleted under this wasteful administration. This is not fiscal stewardship. It is wastefulness, incompetence, and corruption masked by selective storytelling. The APNU maintains that some of Ghana's oil wealth must be saved for difficult times and future generations, while some must be invested and used strategically with transparency and accountability to uplift all Guyanese and not be rapidly consumed to prop up a government with no long-term economic vision. This situation is exacerbated by the potential negative economic impact on trade by recent geopolitical occurrences within Latin America and the Caribbean region. Should any migration issues pop up, we will be forced to distribute national wealth to supply the needs of migrants. We wish to reiterate our position that accepting non-Guyanese deportees through deportation is unacceptable. This is more so when they are rejects of another society and will be detrimental to ours. APNU cannot understand the logic behind accepting deportees that another society does not want. Were they assets, the sending government would have kept them. The question becomes, why would we accept what others do not want? We demand a halt to this insane hurtling to an agreement that is not in our national interests. This is, in environmental terms, like sending toxic material to another country to affect them rather than the sending country. National security questions met with silence. Finally, APNU expresses deep concern over the government evasive posture on national security amid escalating national threats. Direct and public warnings are now being issued, yet Parliament and the public remain without a comprehensive briefing, a national risk assessment, or a clear articulation of Guyana's strategic posture. Leadership cannot be outsourced to press statements, nor can national security be governed by ambiguity. Guyanese deserve clarity, preparedness, truthfulness, and not silence. APNU has provided concrete steps to be followed to mitigate both the immediate and long term impacts of the national security risks we face as a nation. The rule of law and Guyana's national interests must be paramount and communicated with all our international counterparts, while we remain as a healthy partner for global peace and cooperation.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman Solomon.
Thank you very much. Mine workers exploited, labor protections ignored. APNU stands firmly with Guyanese mine workers, particularly those at Aurora Gold Mines, who continue to endure unsafe conditions against wages, stagnant, and official indifference. Despite repeated complaints concerning food quality, dust exposure, inadequate ventilation, unsafe roads, and the absence of proper personal protective equipment, the Ministry of Labor has demonstrated alarming inertia. Even after a site investigation was completed, the minister publicly admitted he had not taken the time to read the findings. This dereliction of duty places thousands of Guyanese workers at risk in one of Guyana's most hazardous industries. The tragic death of miner Joseph Licorice, a dear classmate of mine last year, underscores these are not hypothetical dangers, but lethal consequences of regulatory negligence. Furthermore, workers now protest stagnant wages despite the mine's massive expansion and increased profitability. Their demands are reasonable, their grievances are legitimate, and their treatment unacceptable. Workers must be treated fairly. The APNU reiterates attention without action is meaningless, and governance that prioritizes corporate convenience over worker safety is fundamentally unjust. The APNU believes that a good government can champion adequate working conditions and compensation for workers that are Guyanese while supporting the business community and foreign investment in Guyana. Public servants betrayed amid rising cost of living. While billions are budgeted for salary increases in 2025, public servants were denied both wage increases and promised cash grants. Former Auditor General Anand Gulsaran has rightly questioned the redirection of 19 billion allocated for employment costs without parliamentary transparency or approval. At a time when cost of living is crushing our souls and poverty remains widespread, teachers, nurses, doctors, and public servants are left without relief. Campaign promises of a bright Christmas quietly evaporated after the elections. It was clearly an election gimmick aimed at ensuring browbeaten hard-working public servants and deserving citizens. This selective generosity in which some benefited while others are excluded, it exposes a government more committed to political expediency than equity and accountability. In conclusion, the cumulative effect of these failures is clear. A government that spends recklessly, neglects workers, sidelines public servants, weakens constitutional order, and avoid accountability on national security is not a good government for Guyana. The APNU remains steadfast in its duty to advocate for Guyanese interests and to demand transparency and to hold this administration accountable. The country is watching. History is watching. And the Guyanese people deserve far better than what they are currently being offered at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor is now open for questions on the press statement, and of course, you'll do so by the raise of hand and stating your media house. Floor is open for questions. Mr. Adam Harris.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Mr. Sorry?
We weren't hearing you for a sec just now, so I don't know if you said anything.
All right, you can hear me now?
Clearly, yes.
All right. I said I came in when Mr. Solomon was talking about the Auditor General, former Auditor General finding of the government expenditure. And you talked about the spending of it, 6 billion, 16 billion, I don't remember the exact figure.
19.
But is that the only incidence of wasteful spending that the Auditor General found?
No, Adam, certainly not. I think outside of the spending of what we see outlined for the public servants and also areas such as the gas to energy project, there are many spending by this government that even as the report is there and not being placed before Parliament, it is difficult for Parliament to even appreciate all the other areas outlined in the report, more so the amount of monies that could be calculated effectively. But I think that goes to show, Adam, just why it is important for this government to open itself, more so to have Parliament convene so that we can properly look at not only the Auditor General's report, but even the Minister of Finance mid-year report that outlines so much of what is expected and so much that was spent over the period of 2025. But it is important, again, Adam, to have the Parliament convene so that these questions to ask of the Auditor General report can be answered.
Additionally, Adam, it has to be taken in the context of the fact that the government in April of 2022 changed the rules of the Public Accounts Committee. And after that, they have continuously ensured that the Public Accounts Committee did not meet, so that the kind of scrutiny that should have been done for the accounts of 2020 to 2025, that scrutiny did not occur. However, even with the absence of public account scrutiny, there is mounting evidence of waste and other forms of corruption. You don't have to get into the reports to know. You have a situation where money was given out to do pump stations, and until now, they aren't realized. For years, money was being spent on the Suez-Linden Highway, and really only in 2025 that the work really begun. So there are a plethora of things that you can see that suggest wastefulness. I think we must remember that virtually all the election observers pointed out the use of government resources to fund the PPP election. And again, that will not only constitute waste, it constitutes corruption.
But let me just add to that too, Adam. Among the many grants that we see are distributed, whether those occurred in 2020, 2021, and where they were flagged to date, we see more grants continue to be distributed, and the accountability in terms of oversight to have the Auditor General's input and also parliamentary input is lacking. And we see where we continue to have more grants, and in the same manner, even by the ministers, ministries who have been flagged before are given large amount of sums still to continue to distribute without much oversight.
And Adam needs to make it clear here that we're not opposed to grants. What he's saying is that it should be done within the confines of accountability, so that the lawlessness, wastefulness, and corruption will not occur.
Thank you.
quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
We've been hearing all about and seeing the corruption, the spending without approval and all of that. But we're getting no action. The last time there was an attempt at action was during the David Granger admin when Ashley Singh and Brassington and those were charged. What is the way forward now? Will we just be able to sit and talk, especially since the government has its majority?
I've always said, Adam, that the opposition task is to expose, which we have been doing year go, year come. We also have got to now, I think, specifically analyze the psyche of the Guyanese people and be able to mobilize them into action. The reality is that the government has used the resources at its disposal to ensure that it make people don't want to protest. They've used fear. They've changed a lot of the system. So previously where workers were on the fixed establishment and you couldn't fire them easily, they can now be fired at the whims, fancies, and caprices of the government. And so one has to now do a lot of work to understand the psyche of the Guyanese people more, because it has changed significantly from what it used to be in the 90s when the PP just came to power and now. So that is an issue that we have to undertake.
Thank you. Mr. Antonio Day.
Good morning, members of the President, Mr. Norton, and everyone gathered at the head table. I'm not sure if this question was answered because I joined a bit late, but Mr. Norton, what is your party's stance on the acceptance or the arrangement between the government of Guyana and the US to accept third world country nationals in wake of the recent occurrences between the US and Venezuela?
Okay, I'm sorry that you didn't hear, but we dealt with it. Previously in an interview with Gordon Mosley's entity, we dealt with it, but today we added some more. One of the things I pointed out today, or the APNU is pointing out, is that no country really gives away the good things. What in essence you're seeing here is a government deciding that these people are toxic to their society, and they're seeking to choose a small nation that really doesn't have the capacity to deal with it and to use their leverage to get us to take them. I made it the equivalent of the transfer of environmental toxins. You know, there was one time in Guyana where there was going to be an attempt to bring nuclear waste here, and we had to oppose it. Because if you don't want this nuclear waste, why is it you want us to take it? And similarly, if you don't want these deportees, some are criminals, some may not be, then why is it you would want to give them to us? And so our position is, one, we shouldn't be accepting them. And in the previous dispensation, I pointed out that we don't even have a migration policy. And we need to have a migration policy before we even consider general migrants, much less deportees who run amok of the law and the government doesn't want them, and you're choosing to send them to a small country without the resources to handle it. I know some will say that they will give us the resources, but resources cannot make people adopt a culture. That is one. Two, it wouldn't mitigate the negative impact of criminals coming to Guyana. We have seen regularly where the President of the United States said in no uncertain terms that these are bad people. They don't want them. Why should we be accepting them? I don't think we should.
Thank you.
Mind you, this is not being suggesting that migration in itself is bad. The very United States developed based on migration. And if there is going to be migrants coming from a country that will contribute to the development of our economy, etc., within the confines of the law, then I will have no problem. But if you have people who want law abiding, Why would you send them to us for them to continue being in violation of law and merely exporting the problems to a small, vulnerable state like Guyana? In my presentation the other day on Enrico Wilford program, I made the point that we have always got to remember we are a small, vulnerable state without the capacity to handle some of the problems that will come with these actions.
Mr. Norton, or anyone else can answer. What are your thoughts about the ongoing environmental crisis, whereas the government is trying its best to clean up the quote unquote the Garden City, but you saw recently a British tourist would have highlighted the amount of garbage that is littering across the city. Given that we are dubbed as the fastest growing economy, what are your thoughts about this?
There are a number of things that should be said. One, when we were in government, the APNU, we cleaned Georgetown up, and people were commenting and commending. Let me also go back. There was a regional minister under the PPP who said that let the garbage build up in Georgetown. Now, you have to have the political will and good intention. The problem with the government is that the aim is not producing a clean city in which, people feel comfortable. The aim is political. And they are hoping to use it to upstage the present council so that when the local government election come, they can come and say, look what we did. But the problem they have is that they have cultivated in this society a penchant for untidiness. And so it has become a culture interwoven into the fabric of elements in the society, not all, and therefore they're merely coming in and saying we're going to clean up the city wouldn't help. Additionally, because they marginalize and underfund the council, the duly elected body that should be looking it after, they are not in a position to look it after. And so the government itself creates a parallel system which affects what should be the routine cleaning and maintaining of the city of Georgetown. And it is not restricted to Georgetown. They have done it to every council that the APNU would have won. So I would say to you, there are a number of problems. One, the starving of the council, so that even if they clean, when they would have left, the council doesn't have the capacity to maintain it because of their policy of starving the council of resources. And so we have to see this in all its various contexts and understand that it is the absence of political will and the desire to use the resources to destroy your opponents with the hope that you will get the council and then you will do what is right, in quotation. I believe that is the reality we are facing as it relates to Georgetown, the city council, and the lack of cleanliness in the communities.
So let me just add to that. I think what you recognize is a very dingy mentality from the People's Progressive Party. This is a government that, as the leader mentioned earlier, has demonstrated in the past undermining local authority, but more than anything else, starving municipalities and democratic councils of resources that they can use to allow for further cleaning or better management and maintenance of the city or towns or these neighborhood democratic councils. But more than anything else, I think the governance aspect of the government is more than anything else to be blamed for what we are seeing in terms of environmental concerns, garbage buildup, and in general, mismanagement of waste management. You have a government that would allow town clerks and overseers within these constituencies, within these councils, to act on their own behalf. I can give you the example recently serving as mayor of Linden, and the amount of obstruction to some of the most basic decisions to ensure that the clerk put in place the necessary mechanisms to ensure that we have proper and efficient waste management, such as, for example, the hiring of a specialist, Mr. Wright, so that we can have a waste management program. To date, no hiring of that individual. The presentation of a waste management program that was given in terms of the council was never implemented. And these things you can complain to the minister and to the ministry with no end of any type of action to be taken against these officials. Or again, where the government's disrespect for local government goes, and you have not even the local government commission in place so that you can take those complaints to the commission. So even if a council is willing, with the limited resources given, they're unable to execute to ensure that we have a clean environment of these towns and the city of Georgetown.
Thank you. Mr. Adam Harris?
Yes. Either Mr. Solomon or the Common Leader, can you explain the logic of accepting the dregs from the United States, the people they don't want, in a country where poverty is 58%?
Let me just say, the government has demonstrated before that they really have no plan in place in many ways. I think you see many times, and this is not a new initiative, I think Guyanese should be well aware. We heard this last year where there were consideration for persons to be sent to Guyana, and persons had objected in line with the fact that we have no migration policy, and the government accept that. Think about this. We have Venezuelans coming to Guyana and we cannot give them a classification at this point. And they're coming in the thousands. We can't call them refugees. We can't call them, what do we call them? How do we get them into our system to ensure that they pay NIS, to ensure? So now we're going to take a new class of individuals coming to Guyana, and we don't even have the legislative foundation to appreciate how are we going to classify them, much less to accept them. Again, what the government is demonstrating is that they're considering matters and then put plans in place by bullying these initiatives on the public and the Guyanese society.
There are other issues here. Look, this is a diplomatic issue in the first case, and the government has failed in terms of diplomacy. A country in the diplomatic world has to look at all its resources, all its problems, etc., and carve out diplomatic positions to engage a government. I think the government approaches the United States government as a government that they can do nothing about, that we are weak in every sense. And so they become takers of foreign policy rather than initiators. Were I in this position, what would I have done? I would have said to the APNU, look, this is difficult. We don't have the resources. Let us develop a plan on how we engage the international community and say to them, look, we want to maintain good relationships, but this which is happening cannot do us any good. It's not in our national interest. When you become purely takers of foreign policy and you're not creating foreign policy agenda. And let me give you one of my own experiences in the Foreign Service. When I was in charge of the environment at the time in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there was this thing of dumping all these countries into one category, people who are cutting down the forest, etc. And so there was a very anti-cutting forest type operation. What we did in 1990, if I remember the year correctly, under the then Minister Jackson, is to look at Guyana, got all the data, pointing out at the time about 98% of our forest was intact, and therefore we could not be considered like other countries that were cutting down their forests, etc., and that we had put some things in place. And we demanded at that time that we be treated as a country that has the capacity to absorb greenhouse emissions. And so we engage the international community so that they understand our position. In fact, the so-called low carbon development strategy, which came after we left government, was able to take root because we had already put in the minds of the international community, including the United States, that we were a different society when it comes to deforestation. And therefore, to categorize us in the general sense was wrong. And it was accepted, and we benefited significantly from it. Clearly, this government did not say to the United States, look, we have problems with migrants already. We have resource problems. We have a border that we really can't even monitor. We have a fairly high crime rate. And outline the case for not accepting deportees from other countries. And to also add in that argument that those countries where they come from should be the first consideration for giving them to and them taking them, rather than we coming into some agreement in which we're going to take people who we don't have a handle on their historical background. The only thing we know is that they run counter to the law in the United States. In some cases, you won't even know the degree of the crime they would have committed. So in some regard, this is a failure of the development of foreign policy, a foreign policy approach that allows us to articulate our position. In any government worth its salt, Todd could not have been a foreign minister. A foreign minister must be an articulate person that has a command of what I would call multiple disciplines. And if he or she doesn't have it, they should be advised by people from a multidisciplinary background so that they can effectively put out the case of Guyana and achieve the objective you want to achieve. So in some regard, the government seems to be lying down and accepting, rather being proactive and develop foreign policy position and sell them to the international community, sell it to CARICOM, sell it to other countries, sell it to international organizations, so we strengthen our position and don't have to take people who another country doesn't want. I'm not saying it will happen in the United Kingdom, but what happens if the United Kingdom decides that they want to do the same thing? It's a dangerous precedent.
Thank you. The floor is still open for questions.
Mr. Norton, sir, we saw it, at least one of the Caribbean islands that Caribbean island has decided to take, I think, about 10 persons. In this context, we believe that the number of persons matter. Say if Guyana were to take fewer rather than large numbers, we are concerned about water.
I am policy oriented. I believe we should be guided by policy. And so I wouldn't get into what I consider the infinitesimal aspect of it, whether it is 10, 20, or 30. To me, we have to develop clear policies and operate based on the policies rather than what another country would have done. And you do not know the 10 that the other country would have chosen, why they would have chosen it. And therefore, to extrapolate from that into the Ghana situation, I believe is a kind of a non sequitur, which I don't want to be involved in.
Floor is still open for questions.
Will the APNU be raising its concerns at the National Assembly when the sitting is called, and what form that will take?
The APNU's position is simple. We will put Guyana first, we'll put the people of Guyana first, and anything that would have affected the interests of the people of Guyana, we will articulate in every forum, not only the parliament.
Thank you.
But what I'm trying to get from this specifically, will you be tabling a motion, making a statement to the House? What is it you plan to do specifically in the House?
There are a number of things that we plan to do. Some we've already put out there, some not out there. Some things if you put them out there, you allow the people to prepare and ready for you with much more time.
Thank you. Mr. Mark Benchcott.
Hi, thank you. I have a question as it pertains, good morning to everyone. Mr. Norton, as it pertains to the numbers of Guyanese, the number of Guyanese who are being sent to third countries who have complained about being returned to Guyana, that they will be persecuted. Do you guys have the number or the amount of individuals, Guyanese, who are being sent to third countries? And if so, what is your take on that? That's my first question.
Well, it is.
The second question. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me deal with the first one. It is
Sure.
it is difficult for me to comment on that without the facts. If there are people who are there who said they are likely to be prosecuted, I know this government has done a lot of harm to people, and many people would have run from Guyana. So one would need some more information to determine if that was the case. I know Guyanese who came up against this government, and one of them will even say, I have to go else these people will destroy me. And so if somebody like that seeks to go to another country, I wouldn't be annoyed with them. And the other country taking them, if they didn't commit a crime or so, and most likely it is some form of crime, the degree might differ, then that country will have to deal with it. For us here in Guyana, we have got to ensure that we don't get the dregs of the world here. Now, we, as a country, we subscribe to UN conventions, and therefore, in cases where people are being persecuted and prosecuted, then they will have a right to not want to come because it makes them vulnerable. And if that is the case, I will be supportive of such persons.
My second question has to do with the recent utterances of former President Donald Ramattar, with matters pertaining to how the U.S. handled the Maduro situation in Venezuela, and also happenings in the Middle East. I've basically listened to some of those utterances from the former president, and I'm just wondering about the hypocrisy, because the very things and even worse happened under his presidency, with the killings of 3 persons in Linden, breaking up of protests, an assassination of a known critic of the government, Courtney Crummy. But 3 persons were charged on a trumped-up treason charge, spent over a year in prison, one of them being a woman who spent most of that 1 year in solitary confinement. Do you see any sort of hypocrisy coming out of Donald Ramattar's mouth, sir?
All I would say to you is that a lot of things that other people are accused of, this government is guilty of. I didn't hear Donald. I know Ramattar for years, and I know when it comes to the global scene, he is very much in the left-wing category of things, and therefore his positions will reflect that. The Donald Ramattar I know will go in that direction. All I would say on this issue is that Donald now is a former president and a private citizen. And what matters for me most is what position the government is taking, because it is the government position that will determine what happens to us. And may I say, though, Donald and I have always been in separate political parties. Since our youth-time days, we have maintained a cordial relationship. And I'm saying that to say to you that I prefer to deal with him now as a private citizen rather than a former president. But I do acknowledge that some of the things that occurred under him were unacceptable, and I was in the forefront of condemning them.
Finally, if I may, please, it has to do with those who have been, who have been placed on the extradition list, or the sanction list, which includes a senior member of the Guyana Police Force and some others. The public has not been getting much or any information at all as to the position, the government's position, specifically on the senior police officer, whether he's still a serving member of the Guyana Police Force and so forth. Can you shed some light on that issue?
You were talking about the chap who has been sanctioned, who was in the
police force senior superintendent.
No, he was in Northwest at one time. Yeah, the former commander. Now my position,
Yes, sir.
my position is simple. Drugs affect societies. First point. Second, it affects our society. And in large measure, we don't have the resources to. The Guyana Police Force is supposed to be one of the institutions protecting us. And to the extent that anybody in the police force become complicit in crime, and it is established through the legal system that that person is complicit in crime, I believe that person should be dealt with and dealt with condignly. Because when those entrusted to enforce law becomes lawless, and mind you, this is even applicable in the United States. If you are an avid reader of issues in the United States, you will see throughout the history, even with the CIA, there were people who were to enforce law and became complicit in illegalities in virtually all those types of operation. You have that. Now, as I understand it, this policeman was sanctioned, and I draw a distinction between sanction and being indicted in the US. As I understand it, when you're sanctioned, they got some evidence, you're linked to the underworld or to crime, they're pursuing it, they're probably still investigated. When you're indicted is where they provide the evidence to a court in the United States, and that court accepts that there's a prima facie case, and therefore you should be extradited. Now, I don't know that it would have arrived at that level, but to the extent that there is the person is being sanctioned, then it should raise a red flag, and the government should itself have an investigation, and that person should not be involved in working in the police force while that investigation is ongoing. I'm saying this assuming that there's going to be an impartial investigation, but you don't get that in Guyana. So that complicates it. Were it a situation where when these things are raised, you would get an impartial, proper investigation, Jagdeo would have been investigated. Right now, Rodriguez and Mustafa, I think is his name, would have been investigated. We've seen the government has no interest in investigating them. I always make the point, the fish rots from the head. And if the head is rotten, why would it want to sink the body and the tail, knowing that the body and the tail could sink them?
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Antonio there.
Mr. Norton and Mrs. Solomon, given that your background comes from foreign relations or international relations, you had mentioned the Convention on the Rights of Refugees. Ad nauseam, you had said that the government has not shown any interest in having a meeting with the opposition regarding the management of migration policies in this country. If there's anything to escalate, God forbid, what would be the course of action from the parliamentary opposition?
Well, it's the kind of hypothetical question I wouldn't answer. Let me tell you why. It can go in any direction. What we do as a political party, and I do as a leader, I would have analyzed this situation and look at possible options. And when I look at the possible options, I will have in my mind, I will discuss it with our people here, and I will have in my mind responses to different options. But I wouldn't want to speculate. You know, when the Venezuela thing occurred, before the Venezuela thing occurred, I remember Dennis Shubral asking me if I see regime change. And I said at the time, I don't like dealing hypotheticals. I'm saying it again. Because even now with what happened in Venezuela, is it regime change? Is it not? Where will it go? None of us can predict. And so I like you as a journalist, you ask good questions, but I don't want to overindulge in hypotheticals, because what that does is lock you into positions when the reality might have emerged. I must say to you, situations are reflections of reality, but man don't necessarily see all the dimensions of the reality. And so one has to be careful in this circumstance.
But not to say your hypothetical does not demonstrate that this behavior by government is most reckless in their handling of our migration issue. Local communities can attest to the sort of issues that are confronting them, whether it's space to live. I know in Linden we have areas where persons were bulldozed a few years ago in Amelia's ward, and space were prepared for migrants to go and occupy. I know when we complained of this last year, and this is the point I'm making of the dangerous environment that the government of Guyana is creating and attempts to justify, like when Minister Todd came to Linden, to justify the employment of migrants and the settlement of migrants without a policy and more so work in relation with local authorities so that we appreciate and understand, though there is an international obligation to assist persons fleeing persecution, we too must ensure that Guyanese are taken care of and not placed in a position for likely confrontation or dangerous environment that they can lose their lives. So I think you're asking a hypothetical question, but it is the questions like those that demonstrates the reckless behavior of this government in its handling of the migration situation.
And let me say, when it arrives there, it is not diplomacy anymore. It is the violation of the rights of Guyanese. Now, Guyana is an ethnically based society, and the government needs to be very, very careful. Because if you move Afro-Guyanese and then you bring migrants, you signal in a bad position. And that has occurred and should not occur.
Thank you. Ms. Renee?
Hi, good morning. This is Davina Bhagat with Kaiser News.
Oh.
I have a question for Mr. Norton. Preparations are going for this year's budget. I'd like
For
to know
this year's what?
whether the
Budget.
APNU
Oh.
You are breaking up, Ms.
Do you
Davina.
want me to repeat my question?
Yes,
Yeah.
please do.
She's asking about budget.
Okay, I was saying that preparations are ongoing for this year's budget. I don't know whether the APNU was consulted, and what are your expectations in that regard?
We were not consulted, but I can tell you, I can criticize the budget before it is brought out. The fundamental problem we face is the skewed allocation of resources into programs and projects that allow family, friends, and favorites to get rich. Now, could the government change that paradigm? No. It is very difficult for them to produce a budget that serves the interest of the people of Guyana. They are not likely to produce a budget that is based on equity, meaning in essence, those who have less get more, and those who have more get less. They are going to continue down the same road that they have been going. And so I can say to you, I don't expect them to consult us, because if they consult us, we will put to them the things we have in our manifesto, which is based on putting the people first. And they have a tendency to not want to consult. And let me give you a practical example. A number of things they are doing now came from our manifesto. And so they have this tendency to reject what you're saying or not comment on it, but then go and bring it under a different name or approach. I expect them to do that again. They are not a government of ideas. It is a kleptocracy that wants to ensure resources flow for them and those around them. And that to me is the fundamental problem with the government. They can only become involved in meaningful consultation if they are prepared to make the changes and to ensure that Guyana is governed in a way that the resources from Guyana go to a wide cross section of the Guyanese society. The budget will not be an anti-poverty budget. An anti-poverty budget will not serve their interests. The budget is not going to be a budget that is going to help to lower cost of living, because we have made many recommendations which they have not followed or even considered. So what I expect is, in a very cosmetic way, we talk about all the government, meaning all the institutions becoming involved, and they now start to talk about it in a different way and create a ministry that is supposedly supposed to be doing that. But when you see how they're acting in the same old way. So I expect the same old budget.
And let me just add to the fact that the past 5 years have brought you budgets that so far have resulted in 58% of the Guyanese public living in poverty and 38% living in abject poverty. It in itself demonstrates those flawed budgets before, and the approach taken now will only produce such a budget again, which lacks consultation, which lacks Article 13 to have meaningful consultation, not only with political movements. We see that the government stopped at the private sector commission without recognizing the holistic society and what they also would want to see, including the political opposition, in these budgets. So fundamentally, what you have is a government that believes in the top-down approach by giving family, friends, and favorites what is disdain in contracts, whether through infrastructural development contracts, and not necessarily looking at social development initiatives, not necessarily looking at moving salaries for public servants, not necessarily looking at the areas of improving healthcare. You see where hospitals are built deficient of the resources to ensure that they can provide proper care and service for patients. So what you have is the average Guyanese not only living in poverty, but don't have the basic services in the last 5 years budget that can demonstrate that in this year budget, the approach taken by this government will not further see Guyanese remaining in that 58 and 38% poverty line.
Thank you.
Okay, and given the parties, sorry, just a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Given the parties which are concerned over the poverty statistics, what suggestions or recommendations would you make to government to alleviate this scourge in your society, sort of make budgetary provisions for that?
In every budget, we have made recommendations. I don't want to go through them. And if you look at our manifesto, you will see it is aimed at rectifying the problems of the present approach of the government.
But
So a visit to the budget of I don't want it at this stage to put out our proposals. We're going to be speaking in Parliament, and therefore we wouldn't be saying now what is it we want to do. We leave it like that.
But let me just
Why
say,
wait after the budget is presented to make your recommendations to government? Why not make those suggestions now to perhaps see those implemented to benefit the people?
We, like I've said to you, if they consult us, we will engage them and say to them what we think. But I'm also saying to you, I became opposition leader in 2022. My first budget was 2023. We outlined it in that. We outlined it in 2024. We outlined it in 2025. We outlined it in our manifesto. The government doesn't engage because, in their opinion, they will look as though they are taking ideas from us. And I said previously, if you were listening to me, that they would wait till it's over and then they will adopt what we're saying under a new name. Therefore, we have got to strategize on how we release what we release and do what. Let me remind you, this government was viciously opposed to cash transfers. and we continue to ban cash transfers. And then they arrive at a point where, because elections were coming and they were in problems, they went down the road of cash transfers. So it's not a case you're dealing with a rational government that will compromise and cooperate. Even if they agree with you, they are going to come later with a new name, a new approach for the same thing that you would have recommended. And therefore, we are well aware that just outlining it in the fashion you are suggesting will not serve us and the people of Guyana well.
And I think more than that, the leader is right. We are seeing elements of our manifesto at present in policy initiatives of the People's Progressive Party. And added to that, arriving at these policies that the People's Progressive Party arrives at with reference to their budget and budgetary allocation is absent of the national census. So we would like to know, how do you arrive at issues, initiatives, without appreciating the data and numbers to guide those outcomes? But moving back to the People's Progressive Party, a party void of ideas, absent of any understanding of how to put together plans and policies. As such, you see no need to put out the census, and as such, you see where you have manifestos and other initiatives coming from political parties, such as the APNU, are easily adopted by the People's Progressive Party.
But even if we give them ideas, they suffer from an implementation deficit. There are many ideas that they themselves put out and cannot implement. And that implementation deficit is a serious problem. Additionally, we can say all that we want. Their human resource policy approach is bad. They are not training people to serve this society. They are training people so some friends could benefit from online training. It questions the credibility of the training. Look, we have argued in our manifesto that human resource development is the base of development. Are they going to produce a budget in which there is clear human resource strategy? The answer is no. The president himself said it when he was asked by a journalist that interviewed him. He also interviewed me, that we make up the plans as we go along. So there isn't a structured, planned approach to development.
Yeah, it's a good question to ask, because it is the foundation of what is going to come in the next couple of weeks as we prepared for this budget, whether it's in January or February. And it goes to show the type of planning of the People's Progressive Party, the type of approach to planning as outlined the garbage bin approach. To date, not one of the policies outlined by the president, whether it's the EID or even the community cleanup initiative, or all of the different concepts outlined over the past few weeks, that you can find any repository of information, plan, or any understanding of what you're looking at. 8 months for the EID rollout, but where can technical experts examine what this is looking like? How that they can even suggest where there may be flaws. No legislation, no initiatives that will ensure that this is going to work and work effective, but we have offices that are already being opened. These are the sort of concerns that the APNU have expressed, and we have in our manifesto outlined, as mentioned by the leader, where the priorities to ensure that workers are properly incentivized, properly trained and skilled, so that they can deal with some of these initiatives that are even being proposed by the president. Again, not only void of plan, but preparation to ensure that these plans can be properly executed.
Sharma mentioned the census. I want to make a comment. We have asked that the census be made public, and the government refuses to. I don't want people to run away the impression that they don't have it. They have it. In the election campaign, they used information from the census. I know people inside the PPP who said to me that this is the data they got. And then there are some who are not from the PPP, but seeking help from the PPP and that accessed it. And so the issue here is not solely about releasing the census, it's both releasing it and ensuring that the development strategy is based on the data that exists. They cannot do that because the data on poverty will affect their allocation of resources.
Thank you. All right. I see Mr. Shabral. I'll take that as our last question for today.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon, can you say whether there are any problems with respect to the with respect to the approach roads to the new Damarara Bridge from Westmere to Mackenzie? And also, can you, Mr. Norton, say whether indeed you supported the removal of Mr. Maduro from office in the way that he was?
The approach road from the Mackenzie-Wismar Bridge, I know it's currently under construction. They're putting in a new roundabout and some infrastructure. Our biggest concern at the moment with that piece of highway that stretches between the Mackenzie-Wismar Bridge and the junction at Wisrock is where we are seeing on maps, new maps, that the road is going to be called Rupununi Highway. We have concern about that. That highway is called the Winifred Gaskin Highway, after one of our long-serving stalwarts of the People's National Congress, but more so, a government minister that served this nation well. It is most unfortunate that many of the artifacts around the community, including highways around Linden, are now being renamed by the People's Progressive Party. The town of Linden and the people of Linden will strongly object to that. And that is the most featured thing I can say to you at the moment as it relates to the infrastructural works taking place, where we've already saw maps demonstrating the renaming of the highway from the Winifred Gaskin Highway to Rupununi Highway, and we have concerns about that.
And it is so arrogant. Rupununi is way off. That road should be the Linden to Rupununi or Linden to Letem road. And if you so desire, there are parts of it that you can name to honor people in the Rupununi. I want to be made very clear. We're not anti-people in the Rupununi. The Rupununi is well named. But we have a problem when a government seeks to destroy everything that they meet. Now, Winifred Gaskin was a minister who contributed. She was the first minister of race relations in this country. And after the disturbances of the 1963-64, she was the person who undertook and went into communities of all ethnic groups seeking to rebuild race relations. Her role in Linden was well known, and that is why the decision was taken to name it the Winifred Gaskin Highway. Now, it is not in Region 9. It is in Region 10. Why on earth will you be so barefaced, race-oriented, and probably stupid to go and create a confusion by trying to change the name of the Winifred Gaskin Highway to Rupununi Highway? We know what you're doing. Let me tell you what you're doing. You're doing it so that indigenous people could say, oh, them in Linden oppose naming it after an indigenous area. But you are malicious and you are pushing tensions in the society. That road should be Linden to Letem Highway, Winifred Gaskin.
From the bridge to the junction.
From what is now the Winifred Gaskin Highway must continue to be that. I am not somebody who advocates certain things, but I would say to Londoners who live on that road for you, every time they put up a sign, it should come down. There is no rationale for you to want to change it from the Winifred Gadsden Highway. Look, we are rational people. I recall a motion coming to a party congress asking to change the airport from the Chedi Jagan airport back to Timeri. And I remember President Granger and others felt, look, it was already what it was. There's no need to create the kind of tensions. And so it was left like that. Why on earth the People's Progressive Party will seek changes to things that exist? You chose to name the bridge, the Barrett-Jackdale Bridge. I don't agree. I think Barrett has done more harm to this country than good. But I don't think I want to pick a fight over it. But if you go down that road, you're really stepping out of place. And I want to say to President Afanali, do not go down that road. It does not serve Guyana well.
Chabral had
I have
question
a
for you.
follow-up, sir. With respect to the approach road, have you heard anything about the need to compulsorily acquire properties? And secondly, Mr. Norton, please don't forget the question about whether you support
let me answer that before you go forward. I've already outlined my position. Everything that happens should happen within the confines of international law.
And just to the matter of acquisition of properties, we have not had any engagement from the ministry in relation to that. The contractor, China Rail, would have engaged with reference to the bypass road that they're constructing. I know that they pulled that road through a community west of Tuka, and many of the properties within that area are in the vested interests of NISIL, and I think that is where their first focus will be. The municipality was engaged with reference to the realignment of the road, but with regards to property, I'm not at this moment.
Thank you. I want to thank our media personnel for joining today's press conference, and of course to our viewing audience. And I will take this opportunity as well to wish you a happy new year, since this is our first presser for the year. Do have a wonderful weekend.